is the Asus VivoBook Ultra K15, and this is my review of it. This is one of the mid-range beasts that belong to thin and light category by Asus. Before we start, let's get the specs out of the way. You do get a Ryzen 7 5700U CPU with Radeon graphics, 4GB of onboard memory sorted to the board, and 4GB on DIMM for a total of 8GB of RAM, which I've upgraded to 12GB by replacing the 4GB stick with an 8GB stick. For storage, you have a 256GB SN530 by WD and a 1TB Seagate hard drive, 2.5 inch of course. The laptop does come with a full-size numpad and a 15-inch screen with features very thin bezels, and Asus says this laptop has long battery life, which we will check later in this video. Let's talk more about that screen. It's a 15-inch IPS screen with 45% NTSC color space coverage. The colors are vivid and displays bright enough to use in well-lit conditions. Moving on to touchpad, it is medium-sized, fairly accurate tracking, and it's just your plain touchpad, nothing special about it, although it does have a very fast fingerprint sensor, which you can see I'm demoing right here. So you can log into Windows and websites lightning quick. You can barely touch the sensor and it will probably never fail. I wish mobile fingerprint sensors fast. I mean, some of them are, but you know what I'm talking about. There are some. Next up, keyboard. The keyboard's pretty cool with very light actuation force required to type. I was very accurate with this keyboard. Generally, I'm not a fan of laptop keyboards, but this is great. There is a full-size numpad, although with a caveat of the 0 and enter keys. They're in a weird spot, but they're there at least, better than using the top row on your keyboard. The F key row is also pretty useful, and I like that Asus hasn't gone with the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth toggles up on the top row, because who uses them, right? Let me know in the comments below if you use the Wi-Fi toggle on your keyboard. There's also this cool highlight around the enter key, which kind of gives this laptop a personality, so you can identify it's a VivoBook. You look at the enter key. It looks pretty cool and subtle, so it doesn't look, you know, RGB like a gaming laptop. In my opinion, the lime green on that enter key looks pretty sick. Let's talk about I/O. You get HDMI 1.4, 2 USB 2 ports, and 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, so you're limited to 5GB. But one of them is Type-C with display out supported. So you can definitely connect 2 monitors at the same time and run them at 1080p on both. If you don't want to run 1080p, you can run one monitor at 4K 30Hz for your movie watching maybe. What else would you use 4K 30Hz for? There's a headphone jack as well for people who care about that. But there is one port missing, and that is a gigabit or 2.5GB Ethernet port. But somehow Asus managed to fit a micro SD card reader, which a lot of people use apparently. I guess it's better than nothing. Although there is Wi-Fi 6 on board if you prefer to use high-speed Wi-Fi. Now, because it's an Ultrabook, we need to talk about battery life, because Asus claims it's an all-day battery, so we'll check that. And they weren't lying. The battery you get with this package is a 42 Wh weirdly shaped battery, which you might think is pretty small by today's standards, because if you check MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs, they use the 99 Wh batteries. That is the max allowed on an airplane. That's why they've stopped there. But that Ryzen 5700U, which if you remember is 8 cores, 16 threads, which is a lot of cores for an Ultrabook, running at 4 GHz at just 12 to 25 watts power usage. You can see it by looking at the power brick as well. It's pretty tiny, 65 watt one, then a giant 200 watt one that is usually accompanied by gaming laptops. So yeah, the chip is super efficient, so efficient that I ran a browsing test and it lasted for 7 hours when browsing around, 10 hours if you're trying to play streaming videos, so your YouTube and Netflix. And of course, if you try to game, don't expect it to last too long, maybe 2 to 3 hours. But I haven't tested that. Why would you game on an Ultrabook on battery? Maybe Northgard? Northgard is a good contender for this notebook. Now, before we get into the performance numbers, let's see what software is actually included with this system, good and bad. So first up, there is McAfee, which I instantly uninstalled. There's Microsoft Office 2019 Home and Student, which is a nice touch for Ultrabooks, you know. People use that software sometimes. I'm not into that, I use Google Docs. And of course, there's Windows 10 Home license, which I upgraded to Windows 11 Home for free. Speaking of upgrades, I have upgraded the existing 4GB DIMM that was removable from this laptop to 8GB DIMM, making it 12GB of total RAM before benchmarking and everything. So all the performance numbers are with 12GB of RAM, 512 of which is actually dedicated to the built-in graphics. Also, the RAM is running at 3200 MHz if you were curious. So let's get into raw performance metrics. Starting with Geekbench, we get a very respectable score of 1192 on the single core, 6218 on the multi-core, which is very close to my Asus TUF gaming laptop here, and that has 6 cores, 12 threads, and running at 4.1 GHz. The wattage on that is 65 or 85 watts from the CPU. In Cinebench, we see 1242 and 8406 on single core and multi-core respectively. For a more realistic example though, let's look at Browser Bench Speedometer 2.0. The VivoBook scores 147, which is very high performance for browsing the web and doing intermediate office tasks, and it will churn through anything that is CPU intensive. For example, browsing the web or day trading stocks. It is perfect for that stuff. And for the AMD Radeon GPU that is built into the CPU, as I mentioned earlier, it's using 512 megabytes of RAM from our total memory use, so making it 11.5 gigabytes of usable RAM, and 512 is taken by the GPU. On Geekbench, we score 14,007 on OpenCL balanced mode and 15,284 performance mode. With Vulkan, we see 14,861 on Geekbench and 16,903 when you turn on performance mode, which is there in the My Asus app, which kicks the fans to the max to get you the maximum performance available. Not a bad score by any means. Thanks to Asus for giving this option to, boost the fans and pump more voltage into the system for an extra 20 to 30% performance. Now, I know it's not designed to run games, but let's see if it can do it. I fired up Resident Evil 2 Remake. It ran at very respectable 70 FPS on low, totally enjoyable at these settings, and led me to fire up Resident Evil 3, and that worked as well, albeit at 52 FPS average on low. So yeah, don't expect to play AAA titles at 60 FPS locked on high settings, but this laptop can do esports games such as CSGO, Valorant, Rocket League, or even strategy games like Age of Empires and Northgard. Yes, you won't be playing at your highest settings, but the FPS won't be dipping below 60 at any stage in those games. Speaking of games, cooling system on this thing is pretty cool. If you look at it, it's just one giant heat pipe that is OP, taking the heat away from the CPU package, and a large fan pushing all the hot air out. The fan is virtually silent when doing normal tasks, and even medium to high intensive tasks. So who is this laptop for? Well, if you're looking for a laptop with an all-day battery life without compromising on CPU performance, this one's for you. Maybe you're a developer for Windows or Android, or maybe you want the stonk prices to refresh as fast as possible, all while being untethered from the wall without worrying about constantly charging your system. My only gripe, and it's not really a gripe because most Ultrabooks don't have this, is the lack of Ethernet port. I personally would have loved it, but it can be fixed with a USB dongle. But at this thinness level, you really shouldn't be worrying about Ethernet, and Wi-Fi 6 is on board to make up for lost speed from Ethernet if you have a Wi-Fi 6 router. Anyway guys, smash the like button if you found this video helpful. Consider subscribing and dinging that notification bell just down there. You can check out my other videos right up here. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers!